Yes. It's really exciting to be with you guys tonight and to be here as a team, to be most of our 6 p.m. team up here and be able to share with you. If you don't know everyone, I'm Brad, Ryan, Roland and Jace, and we are half of the 6 p.m. team here, plus Nicole at the back, and we're really excited to be with you this evening and to launch this new series which we've called Your Questions, and it comes out of a collection of questions that we've asked you to submit to us. We've got a couple of the youth leaders, young adult leaders, children's leaders, and just asked them what are some of the stuff that they're wrestling with, and won't you just share some of that with us so we have a chance to address that as we go. And so we're going to start that tonight by looking at how do you spend alone time with God? How does that work? What is that all about? And it's really exciting. This is kind of like the most critical thing that you want to get right in your life as a Christian, is how to be with the Father. And Jason and I were chatting a little bit about this as we came from a conference last week. And, we were talking about Jesus. And Jesus was really good at doing ministry, right? He's kind of like the role model. If you want to be a Christian, you should be like Jesus, and you're doing it really well. And if you look at Jesus, Jesus is really good with the crowds. He does ministry to multitudes of people. John looked at it with us this morning in Museberg at how Jesus feeds the 5,000. You've got these multitudes of people that are around. They're all just clamoring to hear what he has to say. And then you've got the 72. It's a smaller group of disciples that Jesus kind of sends out on mission, and he's mentoring them, and they're learning from him, and they're catching his heart, and he's training them. And then below the 72, you've got the 12 disciples that become the apostles, and they kind of become the foundation on which the early church is built, and Jesus is ministering into their lives. And inside the 12, you've got the 3. You've got Peter, James, and John. And they're like Jesus' besties, right? And they hang out and they're really tight and they really love each other. They go up on the mountain together and they get to see the transfiguration of Jesus that no one else sees. And it's like it's a really deep and intimate friendship. And Jesus is great at ministering into all of those contexts. And yet Jesus his center is his best relationship is connecting with the one. Right? Underneath the 3, there's his relationship with the Father. Jesus writes this, or Jesus says this, and John writes it for us in John chapter 10. He says, I and the Father are one. Right? He says, we are so close, we're so intimate in our connection that it's almost like we're together. Right? The Jews wanted to stone him because he says this, and they say, you're claiming a level of closeness, of intimacy, of connection to the Father that's making yourself on a level with him. You're making yourself God because that's how closely connected you're claiming to be with the Father, and there can only be one God. Right? Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And yet, you know what really blows my mind is that this is what Jesus desires for all of us. Right? And there's this incredible prayer that Jesus prays in John chapter 17. And he prays it for his disciples, for the 12, and then for all of those who would believe based on their ministry and their work. Right? So we just read 2 verses to you from John 17, 22 to 23. It says, the glory that you have given me, I give to them, that they may be one, even as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. And it's this beautiful, like incredible 2 verses where Jesus just sums up this nutshell of what it's like to what he desires for us to have. He says, I so desire for you to have this full, deep, intimate fellowship with the Father, just like I've had it. Right? The glory that God gave to him, he's now given to us. And it's that idea that we get to be in him just as he is in the Father and the Father is in him. And we all get to be perfectly one together. Right? And this is pretty much the goal of your Christian life. If you can get this right, if you can be one with Jesus and with the Father, you've kind of created as a Christian. Right? Jesus he says in, I don't know over there, he says in John chapter 5, so, I only do what I see my Father do. John shared that with us this morning. Right? Jesus only did, everything that he did was because his Father shared it with him, and he heard it all the time. Right? He was so one with the Father. And if we can get to that level of intimacy, right, then we're really doing what God has called us to do. And at the core of this, you've got to be really good at spending time alone with God. That's where it comes from. That's where that oneness generates and germinates. Right? Luke is able to characterize Jesus' life in this way. And he writes in Luke chapter 5 from verses 15. He says, but now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him. And he healed their infirmities. Right? Jesus was great with the crowds. And he did incredible ministry. And then verse 16. But he would often withdraw to desolate places and pray. Right? That was how his life was characterized. He would often withdraw because he needed to be alone with the Father. He couldn't be great with the crowds. He couldn't be great with the 72 or the 12 or the 3 unless he was great with the 1. Right? And regardless of how busy life got, Jesus was good at taking time to be alone with his dad. Right? And so that's what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to ask that question, how do we begin to do that? How do we as Christians become good at spending time alone with our dad? Right? And because if I just shared on this topic, you'd get only my perspective and it would be incomplete. Right? We've pulled in the whole team, and I hope that you will benefit from their combined wisdom as I've benefited from their leadership as we lead together. So guys, we're going to dive right in, and we're going to get into a couple of different questions. We're going to try and unpack this a little bit. There's a concept that floats around in Christian circles, and I remember I heard about this, sort of 12 years ago when I came to be a Christian. People started talking about quiet times, and I was like, what's a quiet time? I'm not very good at being quiet. Barney Simon said if it's too loud, you're too old. And so I used to listen to the Night Zoo on real loud. What's a quiet time? What's that all about? And how does that begin to look for us? Anyway, feel free, Feel free. Right, you highlighted in pink, you better go for it. Very cool timer, right? If any of them yabbers on too long, I'm going to round this time and then they have to finish 30 seconds.
We also have a heresy button. Just in case. Just to share a little bit of my testimony, I wasn't raised in a Christian household. I've shared this before, and some of you might not have been there. So I wasn't raised Christian, and so when I became a Christian, I think I was about 14 years old, 14 and a half, whatever. I sort of didn't have all of the songs. I've learned coming to the ATM that I don't know any hymns, and I didn't know all of the traditional Christian things. I wasn't raised and taught what it meant to be with God. Jesus, was something I learned very late, and so I was like, okay, this is great. But I got saved, and it's just God transformed me, and I had a hunger, and I was discipled, but I was also a bit embarrassed about how little I knew. And so I didn't ask the right questions because of how almost they seemed too simple. And so for 2 years, up until I'd say about grade 10, from grade 8 until grade 10, I was a Christian. I would memorize pieces of the Bible because that's just the only thing I knew what to do. And I sort of prayed in groups when we were at church, but I never had alone time with God. I didn't quite have a relationship with Him. And that impacted my life in several ways, but that was just to say, I don't think this is a simple question, and I think a lot of people maybe do carry questions about what does it mean to spend alone time with God and what is a quiet time. And I certainly went for 2 years without really knowing what it meant to spend alone time with God. I think maybe one of the things I can do is just maybe clarify what does it maybe look like, and that can be different for several people. But for me, I love to sit at a desk now. I've sort of learned what works best for me. I love being at a desk. I hear stories of people who can sit in their bed, and I just fall asleep. I just can't do it. But that doesn't mean that that's not a way to do it. It just means it's not the right way for me to do it. But I like to sit at a desk. Sometimes I go to Seattle and I have nice coffee, and I'll do what I say, coffee with God. But also just some of the things I'll try and go sort of break my routine just to add a bit of creativity, and so sometimes I go for a walk on the beach. A hike is sometimes good. I'm from East London where things are a bit closer, so a walk on the beach was less of a mission than it is here in Cape Town. And so that was something that happened a bit more often then. But if I'm house sitting or if I've gone away for a vacation or something, I find a nice spot, I'll go sit outside and maybe let creation minister to me as well and spend time with God there. But that's sort of, I think it can look so different for so many people, and I think that's sort of what we're trying to expose tonight. This is something we all should be growing in and appreciating, and it can look very different for very many people.
Cool, thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, I think from my side, if you could just spy on my wife having her quiet time, you realise that the word quiet time just gets completely smashed because it's not quiet at all. And I think that was one of the confusing things for me as a young Christian. This quiet time label has really been terrible because you expect it to just be quiet. So this is what my wife does. She dances, right? She puts music on and she's got her Bible, then I come home sometimes and David starts to dance and this music comes on and I'm looking at him and I'm like, I didn't teach him that, And so I look across at Mandy and and so she's blushing. And she's like, what happened here? She's like, no, we had a quiet time. I'm like, really, was it quiet? No, it wasn't. And once she was dancing, she had flags, right? And she was dancing with flags. It wasn't at home because we don't have flags at home, we should. But she was in a prayer room and she was dancing and music was pumping and she had a Bible out on the desk and she was dancing and waving flags, and she'll kill me if I'm telling you this, but before telling you this, and she was waving flags. Sorry, she was waving flags, Anyway, long story short, someone put in the code as one of those coded doors. She was they're putting in the code to come and pray. And she, in one swift movement, went from the flags to and then down onto her knees. The flags disappeared. I think they almost got caught in the ceiling fan. She got rid of those. Yeah, I mean, it was just watching my wife, I realized like this is definitely not a quiet time. And I think as Ryan alluded to, you can be quiet. I think you should be able to be quiet. But for me especially as well, I like to listen to stuff. I like to be out in nature. I like to go for walks. I like to listen to sermons. And I think it's just, we need to get rid of that quiet word as a definition for time alone with God and really replace it with whatever God's equipped us to do to best connect with Him. You know, I know that's a longer version of saying spending time with God, but it doesn't have to be quiet at all.
Jerry, you want to add anything?
Well, I was just going to say it's hard to have dreams unless you're asleep. So that's another great way that you can be connecting with God. And when you have kids, that just takes on a whole new level of
Can we just put on
significance.
this is not an excuse to mix your alone time with God and just sleep. Right? But dreams are really cool, and it's a great way to connect with God. Jace actually preached on it in Musenberg last week. It's really good. If you want to grow in that area, I encourage you to listen to it. Guys, where would you normally do your quiet times, your alone times? Let's stick with that.
Maybe I can just pick up as well to say the way that I've spent time with God has changed over my life as my life has changed. And so I know one of the big shifts for us came when we had kids. And suddenly, I'm typically a night owl. Like I like to stay awake late at night. I kind of click alive at night. And then we had kids, and I realized I was trying to click alive at night, but then still wake up really early in the morning. And I just began to get more and more tired. And I realized actually I've got to shift the way that I am naturally wired to actually have this time with God into something that is actually going to work in the life space that I'm in. And so shifted to a time where I'd spend time alone with God more in the mornings then, and get up before they were getting up. And so I think to be kind to yourself and recognizing we want to be really intentional about meeting with God. I think whatever season of life you're in, we want to be really intentional about meeting with God, but recognize that's going to be different in the different spaces that you're in. And to look for that. And it's not to say I'm going to let my diary dictate my life, but because you want to put the big rocks in the jar first, but it's also to recognize there are different demands that we have on our time in different times of our life. And so to work with that and ask God to give you wisdom. I know one of the things that Nikki and I did, and I remember just so distinctly, we sat down, we realized, wow, this stuff is so busy, there's so much on, we've got the kids, how do we actually do this? And we said, well, God says in His Word, if we lack wisdom, we can ask Him and He'll give us wisdom. So that we can know how to have this time. And we said, okay, God has a wisdom for us to know how to spend time alone with Him in this season that we're in. So we just took time and we prayed about it. We said, okay, God, you give us wisdom. And literally in that prayer time, we came up with this plan for how we were going to spend time alone with God, how we were going to spend time with God together as a couple. And we just outworked it. It was amazing to see how when we depended on Him to give us the model for that time, that actually we found that we were able to do it. And we had the time that we needed to really be growing with Him.
That's great. So in summary then, we need to pick the times in our life that best work for us and not be like too stuck in doing it in the morning, in the evening, in the afternoon, but just make sure that you claim that time and really work with it. Be intentional about it. Alright, so I heard a story about one of the pastors we know out in Melbourne, was Rob Lucas. And Rob has a really good alone time with God. It starts at 4 o'clock in the morning, every morning. Right? That was, when I heard that, I was deeply challenged. And I was like, man, I can't even think at 4 o'clock in the morning. When we're taking this time alone with God, how long is like really a good time to take alone with God?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
This has been something that really helped me in my thinking about this. Spending more time with God does not make God love me more. Okay? It doesn't make Him love me more. But it does make me stronger in Him. That's a reality. Okay? So the more, and if you think of this in a fitness, how many of you have trained for a race? Okay? Running, cycling, or a sport. Okay? So the way that you train impacts the way that you play. It's just like a cause and effect thing. Okay? The more time you spend with God, the more you get impacted by Him in your life. And it just gets richer and deeper and stronger. It doesn't mean He loves you more. It just means you probably are able to love Him more and to love other people more. And so when that clicked for me, it sort of removed, because I think so, and I'll touch on this again just now, but we can have an idea that we need to have a time with God in order to make sure that we remain in God's favor. Okay? As opposed to, no, we have been brought into God's favor by grace because of what Jesus has done. However, I want to grow strong in Him. And to grow strong in Him, I need to spend time with Him. And it's an investment. And so the more you are able to invest time into being with Him, the more that you are going to reap kingdom reward in your life. And so I don't think it's about, I must have 10 minutes, I must have 15 minutes. You must invest as much as you can, because it's the best place to invest. But don't feel like you have to do it in order to have Him love you, because then you're not going to want to go ever, because you're not going to think He's going to embrace you when you get there. Every time you get there, He embraces you. But it's often a question of who are you as you leave. And the person you are who leaves is dependent on how long you were there. And that for me has been really helpful.
Maybe just to add two things for me. I think being willing to grow is also something that I learned. I often like to jump into things without taking the necessary steps to get there. So using the training metaphor, I've often done marathons and intended to train but never really trained and ended up hating myself afterwards. And so sometimes I would try and do that, whether it be with time with God. I was like, hey, I can spend 2 hours with God now, and it just wouldn't go as I hoped, and I'd end up being more discouraged than anything. And so giving myself the grace to grow as I've gone in my journey with the Lord, and acknowledge that in seasons it'll be longer and shorter, and also as you get spiritually fit, prayer with God will be something that will grow, and you'll be able to do it for longer spells and study your word and things like that as well. And then the other thing is, I think, one of the analogies I always remembered, and John, it was you preached this at Sterling Baptist back in 2005 or 6, when I was in grade 8 and 9. I've carried it since then. Great message. But he said, if you had to treat your marriage the same way some people treat their relationship with the Lord, it would fall apart. You can't just spend half an hour with your wife in the morning, or your husband in the morning, and expect your relationship to last. And I really carried that, and I realized what that means is then using the gaps in your day. And so, yes, you have an intentional coffee together in the beginning, but then throughout the day, checking in with God. When I'm in my car and I've got 40 minutes of traffic, I could listen to 5FM, but, well, really, and actually there's some opportunities in your day that maybe you can take advantage of to spend time with God, as opposed to just limiting it to one quiet time or one alone time in the beginning or the end of your day.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I think for me, I just want to touch on something that's maybe just a little bit different. Can I touch on this point here?
You want to jump down? Before you jump down, I just want to ask one more question. I know one of the things we battle with, at least I know I've battled with this, and I know others have battled with this, is like, you want to be having your alone time regularly, and we're talking about training and that kind of disciplining yourself into training. What happens when you miss a day or you miss a week? Like, how do you resolve that? How do we get to understand that in the kingdom when it comes to spending time alone with God?
Maybe just to say,
Totally prepared for this.
Cool. I think one of the things that was on my heart as we discussed this was just to mention that I think for your time alone with the Lord, we have to have an exit strategy, right? And the reason why I call it an exit strategy is because sometimes we have this view that our alone time with the Lord is that's it. And we sort of leave that, and we've left God behind, and we go into the rest of the day. And it's true that alone time with the Lord is preparing you for the day, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the morning. It can be at night. And if you have your quiet time or your alone time with the Lord, like myself, at night, whether I had children or not, it would happen then, because I'm a night owl. I still need to leave that time aware that God hasn't left me and I haven't left the Lord. It's just my alone time with Him. So my last prayer often at night when I'm spending time with the Lord is, Lord, allow me to wake up with you in my heart, right? Because I need to leave that space knowing that that relationship doesn't end then, the communication doesn't end then. I think so often we do just tick the box and we feel like, okay, now we've done this and God is not going to be with me, or I'm not going to be aware of His presence, or we don't have an expectancy to be aware of His presence. throughout the rest of the day. But if you have an exit strategy, and you know that God is with you and you are able to hear Him, then it just changes the whole way you do that alone time with Him and what you expect to come afterwards. And I read something really interesting in a book on spiritual leadership by Charles Spurgeon. And he said this, and it's from this that I actually developed this idea or this strategy of developing an exit strategy for my alone time with Him. He said, if I could not have 5 minutes that I might spend in prayer by myself, I should pray all the same. Minute by minute, moment by moment, somehow or other, my heart must commune with God. Prayer has become as essential to me as the heaving of my lungs and the beating of my pulse. And what I got from that was this strong, powerful man of the Lord realized that his time with God didn't just end when his time that he had set aside to spend with God had come to an end. He realized that that was his commitment to God, to build the relationship, to take it deeper, but that there was a possibility, moment by moment, minute by minute, throughout every single day, that he was able to connect with God. His heart actually longs for that. And so I think we need to have an exit strategy which makes the time that you do set aside for spending time with God, just makes it more exciting. Right?
The thought that came and left came back. So I'm share now. I realized as a people today in the Christian world, I think that we are very afraid of legalism. We're very afraid of being legalistic, so much so that we have largely ditched discipline to our detriment. It's our detriment. And I realized for me, so many of the things that have actually turned into massive blessing in my life have been things that I haven't really had an emotional feeling of joy as I've stepped into them. But I've known it's been the right thing to do. And as I have stepped out to do it, God has changed me in the midst of it. And to go back to your training example, or thinking of this as training, sometimes, when we were training in the Alliance, it's raining or it's cold, and you think, oh, do I really want to do this? And then you go and you do it, and you actually realize, wow, this has benefited me so much. And I think the longer we don't spend time with God, the more it feels awkward to go and do it again, which is the weird thing. You'd think it would be the other way, but it's almost as you are spending time with God, it's like being a runner. When you're running all the time, it's easy to kind of put your shoes on and get out the door and go and run again. But you leave it for 2 months, and then you try and go again, and the first couple of kilometers feel like they're killing you. And it can be in a similar way, I find, in our relationship with God. If we allow distance to come, then it feels more difficult to reconnect. And I want to just encourage you, if you're in that space, just do it. That's the Nike slogan. Hey, just do it. Just get there. Just get intentional with Him again. And you will find that blessing will come out of that choosing to be disciplined in the Spirit.
And just want to add on to what Jace is saying. Just want to add on to what Jace is saying quickly. I think often we feel like we can't do it because we don't know what to pray. Right? And in those times, a very simple thing to do is to pray for prayer. Right? And then if we can't do that, we often use the excuse that we're going through a really tough time or things are really, really difficult for us. And so no matter how much we want to, we can't because life's difficult. And I took courage from David as he writes Psalm 130. He was in a really, really tough place. And it speaks about the place he was in when he did cry out to God. And it says, out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Hear my voice and let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. David's in this place where he's in the depths, but so often we allow the floodwaters of life to sweep over us and to drown us and to silence us. But actually God's going, come to me and pray for prayer. And even in the deepest, darkest place of your life, that's when you need to be crying out the most. And so we actually need to be disciplined because a feeling is not going to get you into the place with the Lord that you need to be when you're in that place. What's going to get you into that place is discipline and a knowledge that God is waiting. And so we cry out to God, even from the depths, we cry out. And even when I feel like I don't have anything to pray, so I avoid it, I go, God, I'm coming to you to pray for prayer. Simple as that, and then I wait.
It's really great, Paul. So I think we want to jump into this next question. I think really connects with this question of how we struggle to make time and to protect that time, and to ask the question, how do you guys go around protecting the time that you separate to be alone with God?
one of the massive things that I learned, and it's been a process for me over the last couple of years, Paul says that we are in the midst of a spiritual battle all the time. All the time. Even right here, there is a spiritual battle that is going on. And if we are not alert to that, not afraid of it, but if we're not alert to it, then it's like we're taking hits and we don't even realize it. And so for me to realize, actually, the times when I want to be intentionally alone with God are possibly some of the times that come under the biggest spiritual attack in my life. Because those are the times that form the foundation for everything else that I'm going to do with God. If you were an enemy and you were wanting to wreck the church, what would be the space that you go after? It wouldn't be this time, where we're all together. It would be the time when each of us is alone with Him. Because that's actually what determines the strength of the church. It's us as we're alone with God. And then we get to overflow together with one another. And realizing that, I think, changed the way that I go into those times where, suddenly you're feeling like, oh, should I do this? Should I do, I don't have time and I'm so busy. And then you realize that and you go, hang on, what's actually going on here? Is this just normal? And often it is, but sometimes it's really not. And just to be alert to that and know, okay, we need to sometimes deal with spiritual powers that would want to come against those quiet times. And so to actually pray about that. So I do that now. As I come down to pray, if I'm going to be reading my Bible, if I'm going to have a time, I'll pray that God would protect that time for me. And it says that, 1 Thessalonians, that it's God who strengthens us and protects us against the enemy. And so I just pray that scripture. I just pray, God, strengthen me and protect me against the enemy in this time. That as I'm reading your word, I would read it as the Spirit desires me to read it. That you'd give me strength and energy, that there wouldn't be distraction from the enemy, that I'd be able to engage with you, I'd be able to be open to you. And won't you protect this time as I spend it with you? And it's been phenomenal how it's been different. As I've actually been alert to the spiritual battle that we come under as we go into that time. Often before, but also during those times.
Awesome. Thanks, James.
I think one of the things John Piper said was that some of the greatest spiritual battles you fight are at the level of desire. And so it's just acknowledging some of the things that you're desiring to do, or you desire, some of the hobbies even, some of the good things in our lives that can sometimes, and I think the key word is distract us from it. And so often I find myself, be standing in the middle of my room going, oh, what am I going to do now? I've got half an hour, and maybe I haven't spent time with God that day, and I'm going, oh, I want to do this. That seems like fun. And then I see my Bible, and there's these you almost picture this battle within you, your soul waging war against your flesh, and I think just being aware of that helps you to know what's going on, helps you to know what's waging war, and being on guard as well against condemnation and allowing the enemy to then throw guilt at you. But I think when we're aware of the war and the level of desire, we can sometimes then have greater victory and choose then to protect that time and to go into it. I think also on a practical level, scheduling it in has been very helpful for me. Just being very practical, just being I make coffee with people, I put it in my diary so I don't forget. So if I'm going to have coffee with the Lord, I'm going to put it in my diary so I don't forget, or in my phone. And I think that's been very helpful. Just I can see the block on my calendar. I'm protecting that time because it belongs to God. And that's when I want to spend, the intentional part of my time, not to ignore obviously the gaps throughout the day. And A.W. Tozer said something very challenging. He said, if anyone wants to be near with the Lord, he must spend time with God and not just intend to. And I think we're often full with a lot of good intentions, but sometimes taking the practical steps necessary to make that time happen is where we fall short. Just to be aware of that.
That's really great, guys. I know I've really seen the benefit of both of those things in my own life and doing that. Now, one of the things that we're going to do in our prayer time, we're probably going to, in our alone time, is probably going to spend some time with the Bible. Maybe you're going to do some other stuff. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that you can add to your alone time to really build that up. But I know one of the things that can be a challenge for many people is spending time in prayer before God. Sometimes you can find yourself drifting off, falling asleep, running out of things to pray, not really knowing what to say. So do you guys have any insight? How do you make your prayer times in your time alone with God better?
I was chatting to someone the other day, and they were saying they did a YWAM prayer DTS for 6 months. And the DTS that they were doing was basically they prayed from 8 in the morning till 8 at night every day for 6 months. That was the assignment, which he was really excited about until he got there And he said he did the first 2 hours. He was like, I have prayed for every single thing that I can think of. I got nothing left to pray for. What am I going to do for the next 6 months? He said the first couple of weeks were actually like terrible, almost, just to like how to fill it with stuff to actually be praying for. And then he said it just clicked as God began to teach him to let the Spirit set the agenda for what he was going to be praying for in that time. And then he said, as he began to learn to do that, to let the Spirit set the agenda, because often we come to pray and it's all the stuff that's on our hearts, which is good. We need to get it off our hearts, and God wants to hear that, and we need to speak to him and share with him what's concerning us. But to begin to intercede and allow the Spirit to reveal to you what's on God's heart, and then begin to pray into that. And that's just like a totally different dynamic of prayer. And so, Rolls, I think you were mentioning, as you go into the time and saying, God, teach me to pray. Help me to pray this time. And, praying in tongues is something that you can do. If you've never done that, we can chat to you about that. We can pray for you for that gift. But that's been a massive blessing to me as well, to be praying in tongues and to allow the Spirit to really set the agenda for those prayer times. It's been big.
Yeah, Jesse stole my point there, but said it better than I could have. I just want to add on to that. I think for me, one thing that I've learned is just that we do sometimes come into that space, that alone time with God, thinking that it's all about us and what we have to pray for. But actually, that alone space for God needs to be set aside for him and for you, so that you can bring what you have on your heart to bring to God, but that also God can speak to you about what's on his heart. And I think we need to be expectant for that. I think most of the problem that I've got to work through is the expectancy I have for that time. And when I come expecting God to speak to me about things that I haven't necessarily had on my agenda, I'm able to pray a lot more, because all of a sudden the Spirit starts to reveal deeper things and greater things that are beyond me even. And I've often had this conversation with guys. They'll go away to a conference, whether it's a healing conference or prophetic conference or something like that, and they'll go and they'll experience God in a way that they haven't experienced God necessarily ever before at a meeting like this. So they'll go away to a healing conference or to a prophetic conference, and they'll go and they'll hear the word of God spoken to them prophetically at a prophetic conference in a way that they haven't in a church meeting like this, or they'll experience healing or see healing taking place in a way that they haven't at a healing conference. And the only difference is that their expectation is to meet with God in that way when they go. And so they go, they're excited for that. They go prepared to receive. And so when God speaks, it doesn't take them by surprise. This is what I expected. Or when healing happens, they go and they see that this is what's happening and this is what I expected to happen. So it doesn't take me by surprise. In fact, it blows me away and it draws me deeper into intimacy with God. We need to be having that same sort of expectancy and open book before God when we come to him in this space as well as in our private time with the Lord. And the more expectant we are for God to do things that will blow our minds, the more we'll experience that, because we've opened up our hearts to receive from him. So often I've prayed about things that I didn't even think about praying about, because I've been expecting God to speak to me about more than what's on my agenda.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Right, you've got something.
Yeah, I mean, personal prayer time was always a struggle for me in the beginning. I found reading and studying the Bible was something I grasped quite fairly easily, because it was tangible, something I could just do. And so I actually struggled, because I would spend maybe half an hour to an hour, whatever it was, studying my Bible, but the communion aspect actually was quite absent. And God would speak to me in those times, and I would learn a lot, and I would learn about the character of God, but I wouldn't commune with God. I wouldn't spend time connecting with him in prayer. And if it was maybe a list of things I wanted in my life. And I really struggled when someone, I got challenged on this and tried to open that space and tried to have this, this personal time where God could share his heart with me, as Ross has alluded to. And it was something that didn't come quite easy, and often I felt like God was quite distant. And he didn't feel quite near. And I found that, a few truths being rooted in my heart and starting in the right place really helped me. And so now something a good friend of mine really encouraged me to do is always to start with cross-oriented prayers. Hebrews 10 prayers, thank you, God, that I can draw near because of your blood. It's not because I'm good. It's not because I'm great. It's not, because I deserve to be at your throne. Your throne is a throne of grace, and your blood has paved the way for me to come into your presence, and you want to hear me. You want to speak to me. Those sort of truths, I think that's the reason Paul often starts his letters with thanksgiving, just to remind ourselves of what God has done and what that means for us. And so for me now, when I'm spending time in prayer, that's not to say it doesn't happen anymore, where God maybe doesn't feel as near or He doesn't feel distant anymore, but usually I can start in the right place, and that at least gets me in the place to receive and to pray, and knowing that God is willing to speak and wanting to commune with me and hear my prayers.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We're going to move into our last question to allow the team to provide some feedback on. We've realized that our time that we spend alone with God is something that's dynamic and develops as we grow and as the different time in our life fluctuates. But there are certain disciplines that you can bring into your life that will really make that time get consistently better. And I'd love to give you guys an opportunity to share some of the disciplines that you've brought into your life that have really improved the time that you've spent alone with God.
Cool. Well, I really, really love the Bible, and so as I said, it's something that I really do enjoy studying the scriptures, and so it's something I really encourage my life group to do, is to go through the Bible systematically, to choose a book of the Bible, and to go through it, and to allow God then prayerfully to speak to you through that. It also challenges us, I think, to go through sections of the scriptures we might sometimes avoid. I know God challenged me, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, Ryan, you're always in the New Testament. I was like, yeah, the Old Testament's really difficult to understand. And God was like, no, I want to take you on a journey. And I prayed, and He told me to go read through Deuteronomy, and I spent a long time in Deuteronomy, but it was a really blessed time, and He really spoke to me. And so I really encourage, systematic reading of the scriptures, not that that's the only way or the right way, but I found it to be very helpful. And not just to study it, but to meditate on it and allow it to really impact our hearts. And then one sort of practical thing, I really, really, really encourage purchasing a study Bible. You don't need to be a theologian or have a degree to understand it. There's some great people who've done some great work and put together awesome material that is easy to use and understand. My personal preference, ESV Study Bible, particularly because the articles at the back are incredible. They've got pastors, theologians, scholars, several different types of people from different fields to come in and write awesome things, including how do I read the Bible devotionally and personally, and how do I study it. So I really encourage purchasing a study Bible for your time with God.
The NASB's also nice.
Mine's going to sound so super inspirational now. Like Ryan, I also love the Bible, right? Just wanted to say that.
I really, really, really love it.
Super inspirational, guys. Apart from the Bible, I think it is also wise. I think one of the things that I do, I listen to other sermons and I read other books. So just to bring that in, I think like time with God doesn't have to be like whipping yourself, doing things you don't enjoy doing. Like someone said to me, there have to be pastors in Hawaii, there have to be people who go to nice places to do the work of the kingdom. And it's okay to bring good stuff into your alone time with the Lord, things that you enjoy. And there's a whole range of different things that you can do, but one of the things that I do enjoy doing is listening to other sermons and reading other books. And one of the sermons I listened to was by a guy named Rabbi Zacharias, and he preached a sermon called The Problem with Pleasure, and it helped me to understand when I should be spending time with God, because he unpacks the 2 different pleasures that you get. You get illegitimate and legitimate pleasure, and he just said this very simple thing: illegitimate pleasure, no matter what it is something that takes you away from what you should be doing for the kingdom. So I could be going for a run, but I know I should be spending time with God, and that's an illegitimate pleasure, whereas it could have been a legitimate pleasure before. And legitimate pleasure is doing things that don't rob me, the kingdom, or other people of their God-given rights, or what I should be doing for the kingdom. And you just said that with illegitimate pleasure, often the gratification comes straight away, and the hurt and the pain and the brokenness comes afterwards. But with legitimate pleasure, the hard road and sometimes the suffering comes immediately, and then the gratification and the edification comes afterwards. And that just reading that, although it's not scriptural, it just got me to understand that actually I need to dig in deep and prioritize my time with God. And so that's one of the things that I do. I just bring in other people and other sermons and books.
I think for me, my fear of legalism and kind of doing things because you must, and also a lack of understanding, really kept me away from fasting. It was something that I didn't really understand. It's something that I didn't really, it was just not a part of my life at all for a long time. And then I heard a range of teaching on it. I was challenged about it by the Lord, and it has had a huge impact actually on my time that I spend alone with God. And I was talking to someone the other day about it. I'm not sure if any of you have been on canals where they have the locks, and you kind of float the boat into the lock, and then you close the door, and then you open the sluice gates, and it levels up to the next kind of section of river, and then you can open the next gates, and then you're able to kind of go out. And we had childhood holidays where we spent on the boats and on the canals, and just had that picture in my mind. And I think for me, fasting has been like going into those locks, where it has just grown me in something that I don't think I would have grown in had it not been for that discipline in my life. And again, it's not something you do to get God to love you, but it is something that really helps you grow. And I've just found for me that it's been something that's massively helped me to grow, because it's almost that it intentionalizes the whole day or week or however long that you're doing that for. And you kind of think, well, I'm not going to miss my time with God. I'm already missing my food for this time, you know. I've got to make this count. That's not all that it's about, but it's a part of it. Emotionally manipulate yourself. Yeah, no, that's not it, Brad. But I think that there is a humility that you're able to build into yourself at those times that really is a blessing as it comes to relating to God and receiving from Him. And so if that's not something that is a part of your life at the moment, I'm not saying you must do it. I just love to encourage you to give it a try, because I think that you will find massive kingdom fruit comes from that.
Cool. And then, I just wanted to also tag on with what Raul said about engaging other material, other sermons, other books. There's so much helpful stuff out there. I think the one thing I have noticed is you get these devotionals, and some of them are really great and really helpful. I know I enjoy Charles Spurgeon's stuff. I know you do as well, Rolls. But there's some that are really unhelpful, and maybe just to be aware of that. A lot of people rely on these devotionals that come out, and some of them can actually just be more harmful than helpful, because they take one little verse, pull it out of context, and give you a little emotional blurb for the day, and you can read that and feel like you've done your job and you've met with the Lord. And so just to be aware that some of them, just to be honest, they're just unhelpful, and they're just there, I think, they're not more less helpful than they should. And then the last thing I wanted to say is I've really found a lot of benefit, and it didn't come easy to me, in journaling. And so when I spend time with the Lord, a massive part of spending time with God is having a journal with me and journaling what He's saying. And so, when I first started, my first journal has one entry from 2009, 3 entries from 2010, and it slowly gets a bit better, and it's now to a state where I journal almost every day, just because I found so much value in it and I had to work at it. I've found that through a lot of experimenting, I found that probably 2 types of journals are maybe helpful and maybe not. Maybe for you it'll be different. But for myself, I found that when I'm studying the scriptures, I want one where I can write the verse that I'm studying down and really unpack it and how it's applying to me. And then something a bit more like sort of personal in terms of prayer requests I'm writing, maybe almost like diary kind of stuff, like this, God really said this to me, this was a picture I got from Him, that sort of record. And I find it's very beneficial because you can go back and read over some of the things God said to you, showed you, and it's just so encouraging, actually. I remember when I was in seminary, I was doubting my call for a while, and I went back and read what I journaled in 2010, and God just ignited it again in me, and it was just such a blessing to read those words that Pastor Ryan had wrote, and it really benefited me in that season and really sustained me.
That's awesome. I know my call is also journaled down, but I don't really journal at the moment, so maybe I should start again, and God will direct me to the side places.
Did you ever know, Brad? It's like the tech version. It's good.
Notice journaling, that's romance. Okay guys, we've shared a lot of different stuff tonight, covered a wide range of different topics, and maybe you want to chat more with us about them. Kelly and Dan, you guys can come join us up on stage in the meantime. We're going to be available afterwards if you want to bounce any questions off us, you want to float any ideas. We're a great sounding board. We usually manage to shoot down all our own terrible ideas, so hopefully we'll be able to help you as you bounce some ideas. If you want ministry in any of these spaces, if you want to really trust God to help you grow in this area of spending time alone with God, we're going to go into a time now of worship, and that space is open. We're going to worship God together. If you want ministry during that time, come and grab us. We'll be at the front. We'd love to take some time to pray with you and really trust. Our prayer is that as a church, we would be really strong with the one. And if we can be really strong with the one, God will do everything He wants to do through us. So that's our hope, that's our heart for you, and we hope that this time that we've been able to share with you some ideas and stuff that we've learned will help you to be really strong in that.